Welcome to Speak from the Body, a podcast that seeks to explore the wealth of wisdom of the body. My name is Avni Trivedi, and I'm your host, as well as an osteopath, doula, and movement teacher. In this podcast, I speak to experts about all sorts of topics to do with the body, such as touch, trauma, body confidence, gratitude, birth, movement, relaxation, and baby development. My wish is that you learn how to connect with, listen to, and respect your body. Skylar Liberty Rose is a writer who empowers women to embrace ageing and stay seen in a world that asks them to become invisible. Born in London, Skylar moved to New York when she was 40. Her most recent project, A Woman in the World, was selected for inclusion in Women Writing History, a coronavirus journaling project. Her course, Visible, is launching in spring 2021 and is designed to help women develop the courage and confidence to be visible in their 40s and far beyond. She's currently working on publishing her first book, a collection of poetry charting a personal journey of self-acceptance. I'd like to welcome Skylar to the podcast. Hi, Skylar.
Hi, Avni. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, thanks for being here. I wanted to start by asking you what compelled you to start talking about aging and writing about it.
Well, my work for a number of years has been about women's empowerment. For some time, I had a focus on helping women find their courage through creativity. And in the latter part of 2019, I started to kind of feel a sense of disillusionment with really the online world, specifically social media. I loved the work that I was doing, but I also could start to see less and less women my age showing up in ways that I felt were kind of genuine. And I felt as though I was seeing women in their 40s kind of start to slip away from social media, and the focus was very much on influencers and young people. And I kind of felt as though there was just this real lack of authenticity on a lot of the platforms that I was using. So I decided to take a step back and think about what I could do to make a difference there, what I could do to kind of change the conversation. And the thing that kept coming up for me was tell the truth. That was the overwhelming message that was coming through. So I decided to take a step back from my work for helping women find their courage through creativity. And I began a project called A Woman in the World. And A Woman in the World was a photographic diary that I ran for the duration of 2020, because about the experience of women aging. So I, at that point, was definitely beginning to go through perimenopause, and I just couldn't really see much information out there for women. And I thought, well, this can't just be me. I'm not the only person I was 45 then, and I'm certainly not the only 45-year-old woman that's going through perimenopause and feeling isolated in this experience. So again, I began A Woman in the World because I just felt that it was really important for me to share my experience. And I didn't do it with a view of gaining a huge audience or necessarily reaching thousands and thousands of people. But something in me just really knew that this was the right thing to do. So I posted the project daily on Instagram, and all of the photos were in black and white, to signify that our stripped back moments can be just as significant. We've kind of got used to influencer culture being, flawless and a lot of focus on perfection. And again, when I was looking at social media, I could not see my reality reflected at all. So I ran the project as I say, from the duration of 2020. And it just felt so good just to tell the truth and to show up in, yes, a vulnerable way, but it actually felt very empowering as well, because I wasn't doing it. I didn't need to curate any content. I didn't need to think, oh, what am I going to say to my audience tomorrow? I could just simply tell the truth. And they were the guiding words throughout the entire project. Of course, I didn't know at the beginning of 2020 that we would all find ourselves in a pandemic. So it kind of started with perimenopause, and then the pandemic became a thing in, around March. And so it became a diary about pretty much everything. So I was writing about aging. I was writing about changes to my body. I was writing about perimenopause. I was writing about all the intersections, really, of what, it meant to live through a pandemic and have all of these other things happening as well. So when that project ended, I'd always anticipated that it would be a 365-day project. And then when it started to come to a close, and some people who had really connected with it were saying, oh, we don't want this to end. We want it to continue, which was amazing. And again, it was a sign that there's a lack of voices when it comes to women's aging experiences. But I kind of just knew that it was the right thing just to leave it as an entire body of work for 2020. So in 2021, I decided that I wanted to make my women's work about women aging and to have that much more specific focus. So while I'll always be passionate about creativity and helping women find their courage through creativity is still part of my work, because I think that having the courage to be visible during the aging process is still something that ties in with that very well. But it's important for me to make sure that I have some specificity with that focus. And I think there are so many more things that happen as women move through the aging process that are not about our weight or necessarily about our appearance. Those are things that come up for many of us, and I'm not trying to minimize that in any way. But I think that there's a lot of pressure on us to maintain a certain appearance. And I think it kind of devalues somewhat all the rest of the amazing things that we have to offer, and also the other layers of experiences that we're going through during this time. So I want us to be able to, yes, talk about appearance, talk about our skin changing, our bodies changing, but also delve a little bit deeper than that and look at some of the things that we're experiencing psychologically. And not all of it is a negative experience. There's some really positive things that happen during this time of our life when we gain confidence in many areas. So I think there's a gap in the conversation, and I think that there's a definite lack of visibility, and those are the areas that I would like my work to have an impact.
I'm curious to hear more about, you were saying when you started to be visible with your project, that it felt really good, even if it was vulnerable. I'm really curious about that, because some people would be like, oh, I'm not seen here, I'm not mirrored here, so this is not my space. So what made you want to actually step up and be visible?
I think it was really because I wasn't having that experience. And I am a big believer that if you can't find what you're looking for, then you create it. So again, I knew that it was highly unlikely that I was the only person going through that. So it seemed important. And I thought, well, why wait for somebody else to do it? If I think that this is an issue in our society, then why don't I do something about it? And I had a tiny audience on that account. It was a couple of hundred people. And I refused to allow that to be my focus. I refused to succumb to the pressure to start putting out kind of performative posts. If I didn't think I had much to say that day, it didn't matter. I would still post, but I would just literally tell the truth. This is what's happening in my life. And it felt like a relief because I didn't have to pretend. And also it was a daily reminder for me that it's enough. We're enough in our day-to-day moments, and we tend to think of things being Instagram worthy. And I really want us to challenge that, to get away from that idea that we only post our highlights, because what we're doing when we only share our flawless photos and our incredible experiences, we're not making space for our real life. And that's a problem at any age, I think, but particularly for women approaching 40 and in the years beyond, because we're given such limited space when it comes to TV shows and movies, books, you name it. We start to drop off. Our visibility starts to drop off. So I think it's really important that we reclaim spaces. And I didn't always feel that sense of, empowerment every single day. But by and large, I did, because the bottom line was I was doing it for myself and for anybody else who the project may have resonated with. If it was one person, I honestly felt good about that, because I want to connect in meaningful ways, and I want my work to actually have an impact. So I don't want people pressing the like button and then not living differently because of it. I think the things that have changed me most in my life are experiences I've had or things that I've learned and that I go on to live differently because of. So if I could just help one woman feel better about the fact that, her skin is changing, or her body shape is changing, or her moods are not consistent in the way that they once were. If someone can feel less isolated and perhaps more validated because of something I shared, I'm okay with that. That's enough. I don't need it to be an audience of millions. But that said, I definitely would like the conversation to not be something that women in their 40s are just talking about amongst ourselves. I want it to be a part of the broader conversation. But it starts somewhere, right? It has to begin with one person or two people having a conversation, and then we reach out to more people, and then it becomes more of a movement. So then hopefully changes are made.
As you're saying that, I'm just thinking of the young girls and women who grew up with social media and don't know anything different, and have felt that need to just have the right filters and have everything perfect and not have pores on their skin and, all of that you're really being an elder for that generation as well. So it's not just that you're reflecting society for women post 40, but actually marking that space and that territory, which is, there's going to be a point of, well, for so many women that suffer with mental health because of social media, but just where, just the illusion of it all.
Absolutely. And I have friends who have, daughters in their teens, and they're struggling. They're really struggling. I'm hugely grateful that I didn't grow up with social media, because I know that it's hard enough going through puberty and your teens, and the thought of having that magnified by a social media world just seems absolutely horrific to me. There's a positive as well to social media. There's a lot of people who feel other that now have safer spaces because of social media. So it can be a great tool for connection. So it's not a bashing social media. But yeah, I think it is difficult for many younger women. And as you said, they haven't got any kind of prior experience of a life without social media. So it's really disheartening to think that most of them are living in a way where they already feel inferior and not good enough, as they, even with their youthful skin and, you know, all the other things that are supposedly what we're supposed to strive for, they're already struggling. And I think it's really sad that we're saying that they'll be judged from their teens onwards, and then all they can look forward to is getting to approach 40, and then they just drop off the radar. I mean, that just sounds absolutely miserable. I remember actually somebody commenting on an article that I wrote a number of years ago, and it was published in the Huffington Post, and it was about women aging, because I think it was something I look back and I think I can see that I was already starting to think about it. And the response I had from this woman was that I shouldn't really complain about being invisible, because, sorry, it was about street harassment. And she said, I shouldn't really complain about street harassment because there would be a time when I wouldn't even be noticed. And I remember thinking, wow, is that what we think our options are? That as younger women, we're objectified and harassed, sexually harassed. And then we get to 40, 45, 50, and then we're just not noticed anymore. And I think it's actually quite shocking. And I want to find it shocking, because I certainly don't want to normalize it, that we're just going along with that. We're saying, and again, this is a message to younger women because they're seeing it modeled by us. Oh yeah, street harassment is fine. Actually, it's complimentary because, you know, it's men's way of letting us know that we're desirable. And then we get to perimenopausal years and then we're not desirable anymore. And it's ludicrous when I even think about it, but we see that played out all the time. You know, we see our value seems to be dependent on our desirability, and that's so messed up in so many ways. So it's definitely something I want us to be able to dismantle, really, because when we look at it, it's actually laughable. It just doesn't make any sense that we place value on our appearance and our, again, desirability, usually through the male gaze. It's just, we are so much more than that.
And what are the other more positive aspects that you're really keen to show and highlight, rather than it being the skin and menopause and weight gain conversations?
That we are, there's a true sense of power, I think, that comes through. For me, it started around about 40, 42, I want to say, where I started just not doubting myself in the way that I had in my younger years, not feeling as though it was the end of the world if I put on a few pounds, or if I stopped. I began to move away from that perfectionist mentality, and I just started liking myself more. I started looking more inwardly and getting more comfortable with who I was. I've been an introvert all my life, and I never knew that about myself properly until I got into my 40s, which sounds pretty ridiculous, but I think what it was for so many years, I was forcing myself to be someone publicly that I really wasn't that comfortable being. And then when I got into my 40s, I started to realize I don't have to do that anymore. I can just say I'm an introvert and not feel a sense of shame about that. I can start to study things that are actually interesting to me and not think, well, that doesn't sound, particularly like glamorous or, I just stopped caring. I stopped allowing and seeking that external validation that I think subconsciously I had been seeking for many, many years. And it felt like freedom. It felt like I don't have to do those things anymore if I don't want to. I don't have to accept this invite to this brunch if it doesn't feel good for me. And I'm seeing more and more women who are far from willing to, sit at home, watch TV and simply get older. We have so much to offer. And I got a message actually from somebody who connected with my writing years ago, and I had a message from her out of the blue. And she said, I just wanted to let you know how much your words had an impact on me. And she told me this fabulous story that after Hurricane Maria, she decided that she would just go to Puerto Rico and she was going to live there and help people rebuild villages and lives essentially. And that was not something that she had thought about doing previously. But she, I think, just reached an age where it's kind of like, well, if not now, then when? And having that sense of courage rather than, oh, well, I guess that ship has sailed. I think more and more women are starting to realize that ships have never sailed. There's new ships coming through all the time. So we're living longer, It's ludicrous to think that at 40, 45, 55, any ages, that we can say, oh, we're just giving up now. I mean, absolutely not. In the US alone, there are 30 million women between the ages of 40 and 55. So we're here in big numbers and we're not going anywhere. So, I think it's great to see, confidence start to come through. And it's good. There's definitely like nuance there, because as we're perhaps feeling less confident in some areas, there's this much bolder, braver part of our personality that's bursting through. So it's a space of some conflict, I think, at times, which is what I hope to be able to guide women through, because it's not all a negative experience by any means, and it's certainly not all positive. So much like any other part of our life, right? We don't assume that anyone in their 20s is having a really bad time all the time or a really good time all the time. This is just another chapter, but it's one that we don't talk about or celebrate enough, I think.
Yeah, and there's often that narrative of, say, the person under 30 who's done it all, that they've met their person, they've published a book, they've been successful, all of that stuff, as if it's just a list where you have to tick everything off. And that's just so one-dimensional.
Completely. It really is. And I remember being told when I was in my 20s, that it was 27. I actually clearly remember this because I got married. I'm married now, but my first marriage was when I was 25, and it was like a year, basically. I was too young to get married. It was an amazing person, but certainly not the right relationship. And at 27, I remember sitting in a bar in London with my friend and saying, well, who am I going to meet now? I was 27. It's just, I can't believe that was my concern. But I felt that looming pressure of 30 coming up and not having done all the things, not having the house, not having, no longer being in the marriage, not having children, all these things that society was judging me for. And it felt real. It's not something that just appears in our heads. We normalize things based on what we see around us. And we do see that. We see this pressure on young women, especially to to look perfect all the time. And then I think potentially now it's harder than it has been, because the pressure to be in the relationship, yes, to have the children, yes, but also to be running the business or be in the high powered job, it's relentless. It just never ever ends. So I think it's at any age we should always be, challenging the systems around us and looking to see, is this something that we've just inherited and accepted? Is this something that benefits everybody? If it doesn't benefit everybody, who does it benefit and who doesn't it? I think we should always be looking to improve things for everybody. And that doesn't just mean women who are going through the aging process, because we don't just land in our 40s. There's a whole heap of stuff that we've been conditioned to believe by the time we get there. And because a lot of that stuff is so messed up, that I think really impacts our experience in our 40s, because the way that women are sexualized and objectified from puberty onwards doesn't, even though that part of it may end when we reach our 40s, the mental conditioning is still very much there. And I think that's why many women start to feel a sense of loss, because suddenly we don't think we're as desirable as we once were. But if we can stop that or educate younger women as to why it's problematic that we base our worth on what men think of us, essentially, then when we get to our 40s, and if we sense that it's starting to change, we don't have to think of it as a loss. It doesn't have to be that way. So, yes, my work is for women who are approaching 40 and over, but I think it's a message that is relevant for younger people as well, most definitely.
And especially you said about the idea of telling the truth with your photography project. It just makes sense that if it's an internal navigation rather than someone having to succumb to outside systems and things, then it would be much more true.
Absolutely. And I would like us to, just to get away from, stop allowing our self-worth to be determined by social media, by the male gaze, by the movies, by all of these external things that really are not helping us. And I think there's so much struggle there, so much, seeing younger people, hearing or reading articles about younger people taking posts down immediately if they don't get a certain amount of likes on an Instagram post or a Facebook post, and how much social media is informing their sense of worth is really quite startling, and it's certainly not a good thing, because that changes, that fluctuates, and we need to be able to instill in ourselves a sense of connection to ourselves. And I think external validation is something we just have to be much more conscious of when we're seeking it and why we're seeking it. And, what does that mean? What does it mean if we get 1,000 likes on a post? Does that make us a better person? If we get 3 likes on a post, what does that mean, that we're terrible? Like, I like to dismantle things, because I think it's always good to see what's at the root of something, because when we can see that, I think that's when we start to have many more, well, that's just messed up. And a lot of times it's laughable. And then it desensitizes it somewhat. And we are able, I think, from that space to recognize that, our worth is not dependent on these very superficial things. So it's certainly not dependent on people who have never met us and just happen to be scrolling past on the internet. So, yes.
I've got to the stage of life of, say, when I'm watching dramas and films, of just thinking, I don't know what a face is supposed to look like at my age anymore, because so many of the women in Hollywood at my stage of life have just been so augmented But it's really hard to know, there's such a thing of, oh, they're aging well or they look really good for their age. But what does that even mean?
Exactly. And it's such a barbed kind of compliment, isn't it, to follow that up with, she looks good for her age. It's just, again, what does that mean? I have a real problem with the lack of representation from Hollywood and in movies in general. Because for decades, the media have been really instrumental in delivering to us essentially who is worthy, who is desirable. And then it started really in magazines and movies, and then social media became a continuation of that, I think. And in Hollywood, if you, as an older woman, if you can get a role, and that's assuming you can in the first place, then statistically, the chances are that you will have less of a speaking role than your male counterpart, and you'll probably have less screen time. And even when women over, say, 50 are being cast, or, really over 40, it is highly likely that they have had some kind of like cosmetic work done. I'm not knocking that. If I don't want to say that there's an issue with women opting to have cosmetic procedures if that's what makes them feel good. I would like us to be able to have conversations about why that's necessary and why they perhaps feel that if they don't have that work done, that they're somehow, not as attractive or less than worthy. But yeah, I think the lack of representation is a really big deal, because most of us are watching some form of entertainment, and if we're not seeing, real people with real lives, with real faces, then we start to doubt ourselves, and we start to feel a real sense of insecurity about showing up without filters, because we're not seeing that modeled for us. And if we are, we're seeing women ridiculed for it. So it's definitely, it is way beyond time for it to change. It's just, it feels like a tired old story from last century that we're still clinging on to. And then if you look at who's doing the hiring, who's making the movies, who's funding the movies, it's white men who are older men, but are still determining what we see on our screens, and their gaze is still very firmly at younger women, which is messed up.
Yeah, this year is the first year that I can think of a number of pieces of TV work where I felt like the love scenes have felt like they've related, or there's been something I felt connected with. And then I came to understand, there's a role of an intimacy coordinator, and now there's looking at those situations. So it's not just about the directors, I guess, essentially their kind of vision, but that's have their own things that they find beautiful or alluring and everything. So it feels like there's just so much depth needed on so many different things that we would just take for granted, whether it's, the cover of a magazine or a scene in a film.
Exactly. Yeah. And we see it in certain spaces, I think, which is important. I think it's, for decades, we've centered a young, white, thin or slim woman as the object of desire. And we kind of just planted that stereotype in, it's like a drag and drop thing that just like follows us around everywhere. I think people are getting bored with that, quite rightly so, because certainly that's some women do look like that, and plenty of women don't, and plenty of women identify in different ways, and we're not all interested in male attention, and there's so many intersections and that we're overlooking. And I hope that in mainstream media that begins to change, because it does feel like we're just, as I say, holding on to really outdated views, and it will take time for us to actually create change that lasts, rather than, you know, that one movie that everybody loved and then just kind of fades into the background. I think it's any lasting change requires commitment and pushback that's consistent. So I very much see that as part of my work, and just normalizing aging, normalizing, you know, that our skin changes, normalizing that our needs change, our desires change, all of it. It's just another normal chapter in a human life. Just as puberty, we don't shame teenagers for going through puberty. We don't pretend that, I mean, there's a bunch of movies out there about, you know, coming of age for teenagers, and we all enjoy those. We don't say, oh, that's ridiculous, you know, why would you put a teenager on the screen? We don't scoff at it. We don't say, oh my gosh, like their body hasn't even properly formed yet, how terrible that is. But for women aging, it's this big sin and we can't be seen. So yeah, I think I want to really get behind and champion the people that are doing it. And I think the more of us that can amplify the great movies that we do see, the great books we do read, whatever it is, then, you know, it's always the way. If people get behind it, if there's enough interest in something, it starts to become, that's how things become mainstream. So, yeah, let's not pretend that we don't have power, because we do.
Absolutely. What are some of the ways that you suggest to women that you're working with to connect with themselves and their true power?
Well, that's something I am working on at the moment. So in the spring, I am launching Visible, which will be a course for women who are going through perimenopause and beyond. But so I can't talk too much about what the actual content of the course, but the thing that is coming back to me over and over is the sense of community. So I would say that it starts there. It starts with talking to each other, just as we're talking now. I mean, there are so many women from the first article that I wrote this year, and certainly the one that I put out recently about perimenopause. Can we please start talking about perimenopause? I had a lot of messages. I had more direct messages than I did. I had a bunch of messages on the Instagram posts that I share, but I had a lot of direct messages, and where people still don't quite feel comfortable about saying, you know, personal things on a public forum. But women saying, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you said this, because I felt like I was struggling in isolation. I thought it was just me. And I think on one day I had 5 messages that all said, I thought I was going crazy. I thought it was in my head. And I remember just looking at the language, and I thought, my goodness, we're all saying the same thing, and we're not talking to one another about it. And if I hadn't put that post out, how many people that day would have found those words somewhere else, you know? So I think the biggest thing is to trust in a community, to connect with people, you know, create a community or seek one out. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to provide for women, because we do need to be able to just have our experiences heard in a safe space where we're not being ridiculed, where we're not being condemned, we're not being judged. And I think the community is a great way of just strengthening. And this is something that I think we really need to feel stronger about, because at the moment we're kind of treating aging as something to be ashamed of, something that we need to kind of go away and deal with. And somebody said to me recently, I kind of just accept that, you know, my time has passed now it's over to the younger generation. And I was like, oh no, oh hell no, it has not. And I think that's really sad. And I think I also know that if I was 20 and I heard a 45-year-old saying that, I would probably think, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess so. But when you get to 45, you you're in no way ready to just, stop living. So yes to community. And in the course, I want to explore, and I will be sharing some of those publicly, other ways that we can kind of connect with ourselves. I think ritual is a big part of that. Conversations can create change. And I think let's not underestimate the power of coming together and not suffering in silence. So
I read one of your posts where you were talking about exercise and how you'd started to realise that short bursts of exercise regularly through the day were needed, rather than just doing, say, your workout in the morning. And I'd love to just explore more of that, because that's something that comes out. I mean, it's something I'm consciously doing to prepare for perimenopause for myself, of exercising most days, because I've seen the difference it makes in women. And I don't think it's talked about enough.
Absolutely. I got hit with sciatica. I think it was almost 3 years ago. And I mean, anyone who's ever had it, I'd heard of it, but I'd never experienced it. And I herniated a disc in my back, and it was just awful. It was just a huge amount of pain. And so I started to become much more conscious of how often I was sitting, how much exercise I wasn't getting. And what I noticed was that I would start off with good intentions during my recovery, and I would be really focused on, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this walk, or I'm going to do this class. And then if I didn't do that class, or some days if I couldn't do it, then I wouldn't do anything. And so it became, I think a lot of us, if you're someone who's really into exercise and you always have been, it's something that comes naturally to you, then you perhaps have more motivation to do that. But for many of us who aren't that way inclined, it can actually be like, oh gosh, it's another thing I have to do today. It's that thing that's looming that I have to get around to. And so I decided what would work better for me, for my personality, for my schedule, is rather than make it a big thing that I have to, change my outfit and I have to dedicate this hour or 45 minutes, whatever it is, I would make it a series of smaller things throughout the day. And again, almost normalizing movement. And I have my yoga mat just laid out in my office all the time. And I switch from a sitting desk to a standing desk. And I have the yoga mat in between. So my husband works from home as well. I mean, most of us are working from home now. And anytime we have a conversation, if he comes in and we're just kind of, talking about one of our businesses or something, I'll just get on my mat and just start stretching as I'm talking to him. So it just becomes something that I weave in during the day. And I feel like my body responds much better to that. So it doesn't necessarily eliminate the need to kind of get out and, get some cardio in, but it's just, it feels good. It feels good to not sit and, be glued to a keyboard. And then by the time you remember to get up, your shoulders are up by your ears and your body feels crunchy. So I'm also conscious of osteoporosis with, as I get older, and making sure that I'm getting the nutrients that I need, not just now, but in the years to come. So I'm more conscious of taking supplements. And, I want to go into my 50s feeling as confident as I can. And that doesn't mean that I have to always be looking flawless. That's simply not going to happen. But I want to feel good inside. I think this is another common thread that women are saying as they're aging, that after a while they actually become less concerned about their appearance in the way that, they might have been a decade or two before, and more interested in feeling that sense of vitality. And I think that's something we should be really encouraging at every age, not just, again, it's this whole obsession with appearance that I think is not doing any of us any favors. So if we can really celebrate what's happening inside and encourage movement and encourage or create awareness that it doesn't have to be something that people have to find yet another hour in the day to do. It's creating a new habit, essentially.
Yeah, and I love how you touched on feeling good as an important measure, because so many people, there's that thing of I should exercise and it's good for me, but it's often not things that they enjoy doing for their body. And it's like, that's such an important way of actually connecting with how you feel and what you want and what you need, nourishing properly.
Yeah, I think it has to be something you enjoy, because in the mornings, one of my rituals is the first one is I don't look at my phone until I've had at least 1 cup of chai. So I have to have that first, and then I will look at my phone. So I try to get centered. Then after I've had my tea, I'll come into my office, and I will, because I'm a big believer in ritual, and I don't necessarily think, okay, great, I'm going to, get on the yoga mat and do my practice. What I am interested in more is setting my mental kind of headspace for the day. So now I combine it with, I do kind of a meditation on the mat as well as movement. And I light incense, and I kind of get clear on my focus for the day, what it is I want to achieve. And it's kind of a mental preparation, and also physically I feel the benefit of it. So I do my meditation, and then I do my stretches. By the time I actually sit at my desk, also this is 10 minutes, this is not an hour, this is a small ritual that I really enjoy each morning. And by the time I sit at my desk, I'm feeling stretched out. I haven't just got up from bed and then just sat in a chair. I'm feeling good, and mentally I've got more clarity, I've got more focus. And then I just basically drop into that space, 4 or 5 times throughout the day, just not necessarily in quite such a ritualistic way, but just knowing that, the mat is there, having it laid out, not having it rolled up in the corner so that I forget I have to walk past it to get to the standing desk. So it makes sense that, I drop onto it, and it does make me feel good. It feels good physically, but there's definitely that mental clarity that comes as well. It's just a really holistic experience, and that will probably look different for different people. But I do encourage people to connect with what feels good for them, and it doesn't have to be yoga. It doesn't matter if you have a yoga mat or not. Maybe you're a high energy person that really wants to just blast, music on your headphones for 5 minutes and, jump around the place. It has to feel good for you. And I think matching what we do to our personalities is really important as well, because let's get past trying to get people to fit into this is what you should do and this is what you must eat and all those things. No, I don't eat breakfast. I don't eat now till after lunchtime. And that has been something that has worked out really, really well for me. I feel so much better doing that. Some people have to have breakfast as soon as they wake up. That's great too. It's just, I would just really encourage people to embrace where they're at and what their needs are.
That's lovely. And I'm curious about your thoughts on creativity and aging, because you were saying how you worked supporting creativity, or the courage to creativity initially, and I just wondered your perspective on that.
I'm really, really big believer in creativity. I'm passionate about it. I grew up believing that I was not creative at all. And the reason that I believed that was because I couldn't draw. I could draw, but in art class, it was very kind of traditional, here's an image or here's an object, and the class would sit and copy that. So I'm talking, when I was 7, 8. And because of that, and this is so indicative of how experiences in childhood and, beyond can really inform our attitudes towards things, our beliefs. I just believed that I wasn't creative. So I had this huge, decades. I was in my 30s before I started embracing creativity. At that time, it was specifically photography. And then from photography, it became writing. And I believe everybody is creative. I believe that we're creative in different ways, but I believe that everybody is creative at their core. And I think it's a really powerful way when we access our creativity, when we allow ourselves to enjoy creative pursuits, we are really gifting ourselves with a kind of therapy, because we're able to process so much. The actual experience of creating requires us to be vulnerable. We can't get too hung up on whether this is, is it going to be perfect? Am I going to get it wrong? When we can get into the zone and let thoughts like that just fall away, we're really allowing ourselves to connect with that experience. And it's a space, I think it's a magical space where lots of other things can happen without us really focusing on those other things. So if you're going through something, if there's something that is kind of, I don't know, like unprocessed for you, then it can be a really wonderful way of working through that without shining a spotlight on what it is, specifically that you're going through. So it's kind of like a safe space. And yeah, I think making space for creativity in our days and not reducing it to something that we think of as frivolous or surplus to requirements, I think it can be a really transformative experience. And so I see a lot of women who are my age and older really embracing creative pursuits, some of them as hobbies, some of them as businesses. And I think it's amazing because we are feeling more confident. I think we're less worried again about what other people think. Oh gosh, what will they say? What if I try sculpting and I make a mess? Okay, what if you do? What if then you start again? So it's a great confidence builder. It's a great way to connect with other people. I honestly can't think of anything negative about creativity. So I think I would love to see it centered more and in a way that makes it accessible to people who think that they're not creative, or because what we hear a lot of is people saying, oh, I'd love to do that, but I'm not good at that thing. And it's like, well, what does that mean? When we label, I don't think we can label art as good or bad. I thought I couldn't draw. I guess I still hang on to that a little bit, but like who cares what it looks like? It's not as though we're all saying we're going to be in galleries tomorrow. It's almost that social media like sense of perfection. We think we can only do something if it's going to look amazing when we have it on display, and we're missing out on so much and so much fun when we don't allow ourselves to enjoy the process, enjoy making a mess. Why not, right?
Yeah, and it's a way of making a mark as well, isn't it? So it goes back to the visibility and
Exactly. It's a wonderful way of saying, I'm here, I exist. And it's an affirmative action for ourselves as much as anyone else. I often used to say to women, you don't have to show anybody what you create. And it doesn't have to be something that lasts forever. I mean, it can be something that you can make a sand sculpture or play with sand at the beach. The waves are going to come and wash it away. But in that moment, in that act of creating, you're connected to an experience that carries great value. So yeah, I'm all for creativity.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Skylar.
Thank you so much for having me, Avni. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please send me a comment on Twitter or Instagram @AvniTouch. Subscribe to Speak from the Body on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Go to avnihitouch.com/podcast to get the show notes. And finally, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.